Who invited her? The words cut across the ballroom like a violin string snapping mid-song. Heads turned. The music faltered just enough for the sting to settle. She had just stepped inside, tall, steady, in a gown of deep burnt orange that flowed like flame against the marble floor. The white billionaire family sat gathered at the long table near the chandelier. Crystal glasses caught the light. Laughter had been easy a moment ago. Now it twisted sharp. It was the young heiress in a crimson dress, short, glittering, deliberate, who sneered first, her voice carrying with champagne on her breath. Who invited her? She repeated louder like an accusation. Beside her, the arrogant heir in a midnight blue tuxedo leaned back, swirling cognac in his glass. He didn't hide his smirk. Wrong room, he added, just low enough to sound like fact. Eyes followed her. Not the heiress, not the heir, her. The black woman in orange. She walked as though the carpet had been laid for her alone. Spine straight, hair drawn back smooth into a knot that spoke of control, not decoration. No jewels flashed on her. No diamonds screamed from her neck. Just silence that filled space the way money never could. From the corner, a server paused mid-step. His tray of champagne flutes trembled slightly. He had seen scenes like this before, guests ridiculed, pushed aside, but something in her calm unsettled him. Without thinking, he slid his phone into his palm and tapped record. The room wasn't quiet anymore. It was charged. A ripple of whispers swelled. Does she belong here? She looks out of place. Not at a $5 billion table. And yet she kept moving, step by measured step. She reached the edge of the table, placed a slim hand on the back of an empty chair. For a breath, she said nothing. Her silence was the kind that made others restless. The heiress in red leaned forward, lips curling. This isn't a fashion show, she said, laughing for the crowd. Ballrooms closed to outsiders. The heir set his glass down with a click. Security should clear this up, quickly. But she still didn't flinch, didn't blink. She pulled out the chair, let it scrape lightly against the marble, and sat. The chandelier above flickered once, as if the room itself had to decide whose side it was on. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. She rested her hands calmly on the tablecloth, and for the first time, the family saw her eyes not downcast, not pleading, but steady, unwavering. She didn't need to answer who invited her. The real question was how long the others would survive now that she had arrived. The silence didn't last. Laughter rippled down the long table, brittle and sharp. The heiress in crimson leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs as if she'd won before the game had begun. Her manicured hand twirled the stem of her glass. Look at her dress, she said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. This is a $5 billion negotiation, not open seating at a banquet. The words drew a chorus of chuckles. A few guests hid their smiles behind napkins, unwilling to look directly at the woman in orange. The heir in midnight blue tuxedo lifted his chin, savoring the moment. This table is for real players, he said, voice smooth, trained in arrogance. Not for appearances. Security should fix this before dessert. A ripple of tension spread through the ballroom. A guard in a dark suit began to make his way across the floor. At the edge of the room, the young server who had started recording shifted his grip on the tray. His phone kept running, screen dimmed, microphone glowing. He glanced nervously at her, the woman in orange. She didn't nod, didn't even look at him, but the calm in her face steadied his trembling hand. The heiress leaned forward again, eyes sparkling cruelly. She doesn't even flinch, she whispered to her cousin, though her voice carried. Pretending she belongs. It's almost cute. The heir set his glass down with a deliberate tap. Enough wasting time, sir, he called to the guard, now steps away. Escort this woman out. She doesn't belong at this table. The guard hesitated. The room was watching. Guests paused mid-conversation, mid-bite. Forks hovered above plates. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. She sat perfectly still, hands folded, back straight. The gown of burnt orange caught no glitter, no jewels, but still outshone the diamonds around her. The calm wasn't weakness, it was gravity. The heiress's voice cut again, sharper. Do you see anyone here supporting her? Not one, because she's nothing. The words hit the air like a hammer, heavy and certain. For a beat, No one responded. The guard stopped short of her chair. He waited. She turned her head slowly, eyes sweeping the family, then the silent witnesses at surrounding tables. Her lips parted just slightly, still no words, only patience stretched to breaking. The chandelier above hummed with power. The ballroom wasn't just glitter and light anymore. It had become a courtroom, and everyone inside knew it. The heir straightened in his midnight blue tuxedo. "Last chance," he said, voice smooth but rising. "Stand up and leave quietly." But she didn't move. Her silence was louder than their commands, and it was beginning to scare them. The heir's command still lingered in the air when the heiress in crimson decided silence wasn't enough. She reached for the folder at the center of the table, the preliminary draft of the $5 billion agreement, and with a flick of her wrist, tore the first page straight down the middle. The rip echoed like a slap. Gasps rose from nearby tables. A few guests craned their necks, uncertain if this was theater or madness. The heiress laughed, high and sharp. "There. Deal's over. No outsiders at this table." She tossed the shredded paper toward the woman in orange, the fragments fluttering across the tablecloth like white ash. The heir in midnight blue clapped slowly, mock applause filling the heavy pause. "Finally, a little efficiency. Let's not waste more time." The guard, now only a step behind her chair, shifted uncomfortably. His earpiece crackled, a low buzz in the charged silence. The black woman did not move. Her hands remained folded, steady, her face calm enough to make the cruelty around her look childish. At the far end of the ballroom, the young server with the phone recording swallowed hard. His tray of champagne still balanced on one hand, he whispered into the camera, "They're humiliating her," in front of everyone. His voice shook, but his lens stayed steady. The heiress noticed. "Are you filming?" she snapped, pointing her glass toward him. "Put that away before you're out too." "Ugh." Her voice carried, but the room wasn't laughing anymore. Whispers rippled instead. "Why tear the contract? Why bring in security?" The heir leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, eyes locked on the woman in orange. "I'll say it once. You leave now, or I'll have you carried out. This is a private table. Our table, not yours." The chandelier above flickered again. Every eye in the ballroom seemed to wait for her answer, but she gave none. Her silence tightened the air. Even the guard, now close enough to reach her shoulder, hesitated. His hand hovered but did not touch. Something in her composure froze him mid-gesture. The heiress slammed her glass onto the table, liquid spilling across the linen. "Do you see? Not a single word. Because she has nothing. No power. No right." Still, she didn't move. And the silence was no longer weakness. It was warning. The young server whispered into his phone again. "She hasn't said a word. And somehow, she's winning." The ballroom held its breath. Pages lay shredded across white linen, a glass of champagne dripping into the folds of a red dress, and a guard frozen mid-step. The weight of humiliation pressed in, but the woman in orange didn't shrink. She leaned back slightly, exhaling once, like a diver before plunging into cold water. Then, without lifting her gaze, she touched the small earpiece tucked discreetly beneath her hair. "Activate protocol. Phase 1. Her voice was low, almost inaudible under the hum of violins. But it was enough. Somewhere beyond the chandeliers and gilded walls, systems stirred. The heiress scoffed, mistaking the moment for weakness. Talking to herself now? Pathetic. She dabbed her napkin against the spill on her dress and smirked for the room. The heir in midnight blue glanced at the guard, impatient. "Why are you waiting? Remove her." His tones snapped like a whip. But the guard didn't move. Something about the calm authority in her voice had unsettled him. Across the ballroom, the young server kept his phone angled low, eyes darting between her stillness and their fury. The recording caught everything. The rip of the contract, the insults, the silence that refused to break. The woman in orange finally lifted her chin. Her eyes swept the table one by one, pausing on each sneer, each smirk. When she spoke again, her tone carried farther, just enough for surrounding tables to hear. "You mistake silence for absence." The words sliced clean through the chatter. The heiress laughed too loudly, trying to smother the ripple of unease. Big words for someone with no seat at this table. Her cousin leaned in, blue tuxedo catching the chandelier's gleam. "You've been tolerated long enough. This isn't your world, and it never will be." She didn't blink. Her hands rested lightly on the tablecloth as though it belonged to her. At the edge of the room, the server's whisper carried to his recording. She's not raising her voice, not fighting back. And somehow, they looked nervous. The ballroom shifted. Guests who had pretended not to notice were now watching openly. Phones tilted, conversations hushed. The woman in orange straightened in her chair. Her presence, quiet but immovable, filled the space the way music used to before the cruelty started. She didn't need to shout. She had already made her first move. And the family didn't even know the game had changed. The ballroom had shifted. What began as laughter now thinned into unease. The chandeliers still burned bright, but the air itself felt dim, heavy. The heiress in crimson tossed her hair back and leaned toward her cousin. "Why hasn't security handled this?" she hissed. "She's embarrassing the entire evening." The heir in midnight blue tightened his jaw, his smirk fading into irritation. "Because she's stalling," he muttered, then louder for all to hear. "Enough games. You have no right to sit here. Walk out, or be dragged out." Every gaze returned to the woman in orange, still calm, still silent. And then from the edge of the room a voice broke through. I scanned her name earlier." It was soft at first, the young server's voice. He had lowered his tray now, placing the champagne flutes carefully on a side table, his phone still recording, his courage rising. Her name was on the guest list. I saw it myself. The words rippled outward, startling in their clarity. Several guests turned toward him. The heiress whipped her head around, eyes blazing. "Stay out of this. You don't know what you're talking about." But the boy didn't step back. His hand shook slightly, but his words grew firmer. "No, she belongs here. I checked. I remember the name." A murmur swept the tables nearby. People who had been whispering now spoke louder. "Did you hear that? He said she's on the list. So why are they trying to throw her out?" The heir pushed back his chair, the scrape against marble sharp and angry. "A waiter doesn't decide who sits at this table," he snapped. "Your memory means nothing." The young man swallowed, but he didn't lower his phone. Maybe not, but the internet will. The room stilled. Phones were already raised higher. Guests at neighboring tables leaned in, capturing every word. The heiress's cheeks flushed crimson deeper than her dress. "Delete that recording," she hissed. But it was too late. The tide had shifted. One witness had stepped out of silence, and silence no longer protected them. At the center of it all, the woman in orange sat unchanged, her hands folded neatly on the tablecloth. She hadn't spoken since her last sentence, but she didn't need to. The room was beginning to speak for her. The ballroom was no longer a celebration. It was a trial. The young server's words still hung in the air. "She belongs here." I checked. But the heiress in crimson refused to yield. She rose halfway from her chair, red dress catching the chandelier's glow like a flare. "This is absurd," she declared, voice shrill with forced authority. "He's a waiter, not a witness. His word means nothing." The heir in midnight blue followed her lead, standing tall, shoulders squared. "Security," he barked, his tone sharpened into command. "Remove both of them, now." The guard hesitated. His eyes flicked from the woman in orange to the young server, then to the restless crowd of guests whose phones were pointed squarely at him. He froze, his authority questioned by an audience larger than the family. The heiress slammed her glass onto the table again, liquid streaking across the cloth. "Do you see? Even staff is trying to play us. This ends now. Get her out before she humiliates this family further." Whispers surged around the room. Some guests shook their heads. Others filmed more openly, lenses capturing every sneer, every insult. Still seated, the woman in orange lifted her gaze slowly. She didn't need volume, just presence. Her silence pressed heavier than their shouting. The heir leaned forward across the table, voice low, teeth bared. "You're finished here. Whatever stunt you're playing ends tonight. This deal is ours, not yours." But his words cracked against the steady calm across from him. The young server stepped closer, trembling but defiant. "You can't erase her just because you don't like how she looks. I saw her name. I saw it." The heiress snapped, her voice sharp enough to sting the walls. "Enough, guards, drag them both out now." The ballroom gasped. The order was too loud, too final. And still, the woman in orange didn't rise, didn't flinch. She sat anchored, hands resting lightly on the table as though it were hers alone. The chandelier above hummed with static. The air felt electric, caught between collapse and revelation. Everyone in that ballroom knew the family had pushed too far. But no one, not the heiress, not the heir, not the crowd, yet understood just how far the fall would be. The heir's command cracked like a whip. "Drag them out, now!" Two more guards appeared from the edge of the ballroom, black suits cutting through clusters of stunned guests. Their polished shoes clicked against marble, each step echoing like a countdown. The heiress in crimson smirked, lips curling in victory. "Finally," she said, brushing invisible dust from her dress. "No more distractions. This is a family affair." The midnight blue tuxedo heir stood tall beside her, his hand raised toward the approaching guards like a conductor summoning an orchestra. "Remove her first," he said, pointing across the table. "The woman in orange. She has no right here. She never did." But he didn't stop there. With deliberate cruelty, he reached for the guest list displayed on a silver stand near the dais. In one swift motion, he snatched the page and tore it in half. "Her name doesn't exist anymore," he sneered, waving the shredded paper for all to see. "Now she's truly no one." Gasps rippled like waves across the ballroom. The young server stepped forward instinctively. "That's a lie." His voice cracked but held. "Her name was on that list. I saw it scanned." "Oh," the heiress laughed, cruel and musical. "A scanned name? Easy to fake. Technology bends for those desperate enough." She leaned closer to her cousin, voice dripping. "And she reeks of desperation." The guards reached the table now, standing behind the woman in orange. One extended his hand, palm hovering inches from her shoulder. Guests lifted phones higher. The room held its breath. Still, she did not move. Her posture was unshaken, her gaze level, her silence, a fortress no insult could crack. The heir slammed the torn paper onto the table, fragments scattering across crystal and silverware. "There, proof enough for anyone watching. She was never on the list. She was never part of this." The heiress leaned back in her chair, satisfied. "Escort her out. Tonight, the Carter family ends at this table, not hers." The ballroom tightened. Guests whispered, some horrified, others skeptical. A woman in pearls muttered to her husband, "They're making a mistake. Look at her. She's not afraid." The guards hesitated, shifting uncomfortably under the heat of dozens of cameras. Their hands hovered, waiting for her to stand, to struggle, to prove their authority mattered. But she sat unmoved, the calm center of a storm gathering fast. For a moment, the family thought they had won. They had no idea this was the final insult, the one that would ignite her power. The guards loomed behind her chair, their hesitation stretching thin. The torn fragments of the guest list still fluttered across the white tablecloth like ashes. The heiress leaned back smugly, crimson lips curved. "End this already," she ordered. "Remove her." But before a single hand touched her shoulder, the woman in orange tilted her head, one subtle movement, and touched the earpiece beneath her hair. Her voice, low but certain, slipped into the silence. "Protocol, Phase 2. Oh, a pause. Then, in her ear, a crisp reply from far beyond the ballroom. "Confirmed. Systems live. Proceed." The chandeliers above didn't flicker this time. They glared steady, casting light sharper, clearer, almost surgical. She raised her gaze at last. Calm eyes swept the table, locking on the midnight blue tuxedo heir. "You tore a list," she said evenly, "but you can't erase the truth." Her words landed like stone. The heir scoffed, trying to shake the unease creeping through him. Pretty line. Means nothing. But his phone vibrated on the table. Then again, his cousins too. Guests all around the ballroom glanced down at their screens as notifications lit up in unison. The young server blinked, staring at his own phone. On the screen glowed a message, time-stamped and official, "Guest access verified Carter, executive level." Gasps swelled. Screens lifted high, capturing the glow. The heiress snatched her device, scrolling furiously, her smile faltering. "No, this is fake. It has to be fake." The heir's smirk cracked, his jaw clenched. "Who did this? Who gave her access?" She didn't blink, didn't rush. She simply laid her hands flat on the table, as though she were already presiding over it. "Phase 2, she repeated softly, though the words carried. "Visibility." Across the room, servers and staff began murmuring. Guests whispered openly now. The tide had shifted, imperceptible at first, then unmistakable. The young server took a cautious step forward, holding his phone high. "She's in the system," he said, louder than before. "She belongs here. I have proof." Phones across the ballroom confirmed it. A constellation of glowing screens turned against the family. The heiress's voice cracked for the first time. "Shut them down! Shut it all down!" But no one moved. The guards, their orders suddenly clouded by contradiction, glanced at each other. One lowered his hand, the other stepped back, and the woman in orange, still seated, still calm, let silence reign another moment longer. Then she spoke, each word precise. "You tried to erase me with paper," I answered with proof you can't tear apart. The ballroom, once hostile, now teetered. The power was shifting slow, inevitable, unstoppable. The ballroom had turned. Phones lit the room brighter than chandeliers, each screen reflecting one undeniable truth. Her name was real, her access verified. The heiress clutched her crimson dress as though fabric alone could hold her composure. "This is manipulation," she spat, her voice rising an octave. "None of it's official." But her cousin in the midnight blue tuxedo didn't echo her laugh this time. His brow tightened, the smirk gone. He reached for his glass but found his hand unsteady. The woman in orange, still seated at the heart of their fury, let the silence stretch a beat longer. Then she spoke. "You've asked all night who invited me." Her voice was calm, carrying across the ballroom without force, without strain. "The answer is simple. No one did." She leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on theirs. "I wasn't invited. I own the invitation." Gasps burst through the room like shattering glass. Guests leaned in, lips parted. Some clutched pearls, others raised phones higher. The heiress shook her head violently. "Lies! All of it! You're nothing! Nothing!" But the woman in orange didn't falter. She reached into her clutch, withdrew a black access card embossed with silver lettering, and slid it across the table. It landed among the torn fragments of the guest list, gleaming under the chandelier. "Read it," she said. The heir snatched it up, ready to scoff, but the blood drained from his face as the words burned clear. "Executive Director, Carter Global Holdings." His lips parted, but no words came. The heiress leaned over his shoulder, snatched the card from his hand, scanned it frantically, then froze. The room saw it, the seal, the insignia, the authority none of them could deny. Her hand trembled, her voice cracked. This can't be." But it was. The young server whispered into his recording. "She's the CEO, the black CEO. This whole deal belongs to her." Murmurs swept the crowd, no longer whispers but waves. "She owns the company. She runs the deal." They tried to erase her. The woman in orange sat straighter, no longer merely defending a seat. She was presiding over a trial whose verdict was already sealed. Her eyes lingered on the family one by one, the heiress, trembling in red. The heir, pale in his midnight, blue armor that suddenly looked cheap. The older relatives, silent and shrinking. Then she said, steady and final, "You tore paper. I built empires. And tonight, you will understand the difference." The room erupted, not in applause, not yet, but in stunned silence, the kind that shifts history. The ballroom was no longer theirs. The moment the silver-embossed card gleamed under chandelier light, the balance of the night broke. Guests who had once whispered in corners now spoke openly, their words rising like a tide. "She's the CEO. She controls the deal." They tried to erase her. The heiress in crimson staggered back into her chair, the stem of her glass snapping between her fingers. Red wine bled across the white cloth, seeping into the torn contract fragments. Her painted lips trembled. "It's a trick," she whispered to herself, though the microphones of raised phones caught every syllable. "It has to be." The heir in midnight blue didn't sit. He stood rigid, jaw tight, eyes darting from guest to guest as though searching for allies. But none came. The smirk that had once shielded him was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a man watching his stage collapse. Across the room, the young server stepped forward, phone still recording. His voice, trembling but loud, cut through the chaos. "You mocked her. You tried to erase her. But she's the one who owns this deal. I saw the system myself." Murmurs surged. A woman in pearls spoke sharply to her husband. "I'll never do business with this family again." A man in a tailored suit whispered to the camera of his phone. "History is being made in this room tonight." The family matriarch, silver hair pinned tight, slammed her hand on the table, a desperate attempt to restore control. "Enough!" she barked. "We will not be humiliated in our own ballroom." But even her voice cracked. The woman in orange didn't rise. She didn't need to. Her very stillness made their frenzy look small, their shouting powerless. "You asked who invited me," she said again, softly, as if reminding children of a lesson. "But the truth is worse for you. I invited you." Gasps rippled once more. Eyes darted toward the family, then back to her. The heiress clutched her broken glass, eyes wide, whispering frantic denials no one believed. The heir's fists clenched, knuckles white, his tuxedo suddenly suffocating. Phones documented it all. Their collapse, their unraveling. The young server lowered his tray entirely now, both hands gripping his phone steady. "The world is watching," he said into the lens, "and they'll see the truth." The ballroom, once the family's stage, now felt like their courtroom, and their verdict had already been handed down. The ballroom had fallen silent again, but it was not their silence anymore. It was hers. The woman in orange rose at last. Every eye followed her movement, measured, deliberate, unhurried. She placed both hands on the table, pressing down on the torn fragments of paper, the spilled wine, the broken glass. "This deal," she said evenly, "was built on trust, and tonight you proved you never deserved it." The heiress in crimson shook her head, hair tumbling over her shoulders. "No, no, you can't. This is billions. This is generational wealth." Her words cracked, wild, no longer elegant. The heir in midnight blue stepped forward, hands out as if to contain a storm already far beyond him. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You need us. You can't erase a family name this powerful." Her gaze locked on him, steady as stone. "Watch me." She tapped her earpiece once. "Phase 3. Terminate the Horizon Agreement." The reply came instantly, crisp and cold through hidden speakers placed for the event itself. "Confirmed. Access revoked. Contract nullified. Effective immediately." Gasps shot through the ballroom. Phones captured the exact second power shifted. Screens across the room lit with notifications. Deal termination notice issued by Carter Global Holdings. The heiress collapsed into her chair, hands gripping the ruined tablecloth as though she could keep the world from slipping away. "No," she whispered. "Not like this." The heir's fists pounded the wood, but the sound was hollow, desperate. He looked around for support, but the guests only recoiled, shaking their heads, murmuring judgment. Across the room, the young server raised his phone higher. "She canceled it," he breathed into the recording. $5 billion. Gone. Just like that. A woman in pearls clapped once, sharply. Then another guest followed. Soon, a ripple of applause spread, not loud, not celebratory, but steady, inevitable. Approval for justice rendered in real time. The black CEO stood calm in the center of it all, untouched by their collapse. Her words cut clear, final. "You called me nothing. Tonight, I made you nothing. Remember that the next time you sneer at power you don't recognize." The ballroom thundered with silence again, silence heavy with shame, awe, and the echo of justice. Applause faded, leaving only the raw weight of what had just happened. The $5 billion deal lay in ruins, scattered like the torn paper still bleeding red wine across the table. The white billionaire family sat stricken frozen portraits of disbelief, rage, and humiliation. But she was already turning away. The black CEO smoothed the sleeve of her burnt orange gown, lifted her clutch, and began walking toward the ballroom doors. Each step echoed against marble, louder than any music the orchestra might have played. No guard moved to stop her. No guest dared block her path. Phones remained raised, capturing the sight of a woman who had walked into a room unwanted and walked out owning it. The heiress in crimson lunged forward once more, voice shrill and cracking. "You can't just leave. You can't destroy us and walk away." The woman in orange paused at the threshold. She turned just enough for the chandeliers to cast her profile in light, calm, regal, untouchable. Her voice carried, quiet yet resonant enough to settle in every corner of the ballroom. "You asked who invited me. The answer was never you. It was power, and tonight power walked out with me." Gasps rippled again, followed by a hush so deep even the chandeliers seemed to still. The heir in midnight blue dropped into his chair, defeated, head in his hands. The heiress slumped beside him, her red dress no longer glittering but stained, wrinkled, hollow. The guests, though, stood. Some clapped softly, others simply nodded, their eyes following the woman in orange as she strode through the great doors. Behind her, the family had no empire left to protect. In front of her, the world waited, watching, recording, remembering. She did not need applause. She did not need validation. She had written her verdict in action. And as the doors closed behind her, the only truth that remained in the ballroom was this: justice had not shouted. It had simply walked out, undefeated.